Red's Fly Shop, this is Bob. How may I help you today?
Look at that. Woo! Hi, it's Joe at Red's Fly Shop. We're going to wrap up the 3-part series, just doing Riverside chats on flies, and today we're talking streamers. Streamers are a category of fly that typically imitate baitfish or leeches most commonly, and they can be fished a whole bunch of different ways. I'm going to share with you today some of my streamers, and I've got them categorized into 2 basic categories. I've got my large streamers right here, and those are going to be my larger baitfish patterns, things that are essentially 3 inches long or longer that I'm going to strip and move, typically looking for larger trout. And then I've got a box of smaller streamers here, and my smaller streamers I'm often going to fish, well, I'll fish them a bunch of different ways, but the first presentation I'm going to talk about, because I think it's one of the most overlooked avenues of streamer fishing, and that's fishing them on just a pure mono rig on a tight line with like a technical nymphing rod. And we can't really call it Euro nymphing because we're not nymphing, we're actually streamer fishing. So I'm going to start with some flies that I often use for that. And of course, there's tons of overlap in the flies and strategy. But let me start with a fly or two, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about strategy. And the first one is a new fly for me this year, and that's called a pocket dweller from Fulling Mill. And when I saw this fly, it was love at first sight. Let me put that up there again, and I want you to notice a very large tungsten bead with a very small short shank barbless hook. And it's a circle or a competition style hook and a very sparsely tied body. So what I can do with this fly is I can get this fly down very, very quickly, and I can, just like the name implies, it's called a pocket dweller. I love to fish this 2 different ways. I can tight line fish it under a technical rod, say a 10 to 11 foot 2 or 3 weight rod, and I can run this right through small pockets behind boulders. So part of the reason it's called a pocket dweller is you can put this fly in there and it can spend some time in those little hydraulics behind the rocks. Whereas if I threw a big giant streamer in behind the rocks, I may get a reaction, but I'm not going to be able to work this 2 and 3 and 4 times until I convince that large trout to bite. With the pocket dweller, it slides in there, it doesn't spook fish, and I can get it in there. Again, I can really get it to spend some time. The other way I like to fish this fly is I'll actually run this under a very small yarn strike indicator or even a dry fly. So distracting. I've got caddis crawling up my neck right now as we shoot this video. Caddis or a yellow Sally. But the pocket dweller is great because of that jig head hook. I can run my tight line down, I can set that thing on the bottom, and then I can put downstream tension on it so this fly is actually wandering through those little hydraulics, be it around logs or in really small isolated spots. So basically I've taken a presentation that would normally have taken a lot of space with a larger streamer, and I'm actually able to present this streamer on a much smaller scale. And I caught one of my personal best brown trout on this fly just last week. And I was fishing it under a small New Zealand style indicator, and I can place this fly very accurately, and I can work it up under cut banks into pockets that a bigger streamer, I might be able to get it in there, but in order to make a long streamer like this look alive, I need to pull tension against it. And sometimes what happens is these bigger streamers, if I'm dead drifting them or soft drifting them up under cut banks and things, the tails curl up and they don't have that nice, clean identity that a fly like this pocket dweller does. So I think the pocket dweller is one of the ones that I've really excelled with. And I just started fishing it this spring. It also makes a great salmon fry imitation, which we have a lot of on the river that you see behind me there. We have out-migrating juvenile salmon that the trout will prey on. Moving along, there's a family of jig streamers from Fulling Mill as well. Fulling Mill really seems to do a tremendous job. And this is a very sparsely tied marabou jig streamer, and I think that's called a jig minnow. And that marabou will lay back on itself. It will get very streamlined and look like a minnow, but this one has a lot more action. And I could certainly cast and strip this fly, but I do fish it under a tight line rig a lot. And when I'm tight line fishing, I can actually put this streamer on the bottom, and when I feel it bind up on the rocks, I can just start to twitch it with my rod tip. I could even cast it and strip it on that mono line, and it adds a lot of versatility to my streamer fishing because I can throw it into pockets and just slither it along the bottom, right along the floor, almost like a stonefly nymph or any other critter that's gonna live on the rocks. And then I can jig twitch it out of there. If I see a back eddy with slow water where I might not be able to contact fish, I can then throw that fly across the back eddy, let it sink, and strip it in. And there's a whole family of these ones, and I think there's blacks and whites, and the black one, I run that a lot as an anchor fly on a contact nymphing rig. And it could be a leech, it could be a stonefly nymph, it could turn into a minnow as soon as I twitch it and jig it. But I think that mono-based or that technical nymph rod streamer fishing, and I'm speaking exclusively from a do-it-yourself angler standpoint. This has nothing to do with guiding. When we're guiding, we don't use those strategies. We row boats really well and we drift along and put people into fish. But for those watching, which you're 99.9% of you are favoring do-it-yourself fishing, I really feel like that streamer fishing with that tight line or that mono rig is fabulous. Well, I think it's highly effective, but it's also greatly overlooked. I think people look at those technical nymph rigs or those technical setups and they think nymphs and perdigons and junk like that all the time, but I'm running streamers on mine about almost 50% of the time. Next one, same family, also from Fulling Mill, is a jiggy fry, and the marabou on that is so incredibly soft that this fly has a ton of action. It has a little lighter bead, so if I'm in smaller water where I really don't need to slice through that water column, I can run the jiggy fry, and that one performs extremely well. I really, really like that fly. And there are a variety of other jig streamers that I'll run. I wouldn't forget about the classic black woolly bugger that I also, I have that also with a tungsten bead in a jig head style. And it's just a black bugger. That's nothing new, but the buggers that are available today are not your grandfather's woolly buggers. That tungsten jig head style, when fished on a mono line, directly with direct tension of the fly, when this head butts a rock, that upward tension that you're delicately applying with that ultralight rod tip just simply lifts it up, and it can bunny hop over the rocks, and you can spend your entire presentation working right along the bottom. So don't overlook the bugger. All of those flies are quite similar. They're a high density, fast sinking, sparsely tied pattern that you can fish them under indicators. By far I do better under yarn indicators than bobbers. I think bobbers move flies too fast and scare fish for my personal fishing. I think certainly guiding a big western river like this, indicators or bobber style indicators are effective. But I really like those flies. If you are into contact nymphing or tight lining, mono fishing, ear nymphing, whatever the hell you want to call it, I don't even care what you call it, but you're just running direct, light, delicate mono off a technical ultralight long rod, what I love to do when I'm wade fishing myself is I will run my nymph game, be it just your classic anchor fly and a perdigon or whatever you're fishing, and I'll work my way upstream throughout most of my session. I'll work up, 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 up. And then I'm gonna probably hike back down to wherever I'm parked at, my trailhead or whatever it happens to be. The way down is when I really like to work my streamer on the way down, because I can still lob it up and I can slide it and bring the fly toward the fish, which increases your hookup rate by so many times. I don't know if it's 5 to 1 or 10 to 1, but when you slide a streamer slowly at a fish, rainbow trout especially, they don't like to chase, they like to ambush. And so I'll slide that streamer at them, but when it gets downstream from me, if you could imagine, a little critter like this right here, a little critter like this is in contact with the bottom, and then at a certain point, my line's gonna come tight, and then all of a sudden, this streamer breaks free from the bottom and starts swimming laterally at first across the river within inches of the bottom, and then eventually it will swing out and get higher in the column. But when a big fish sees the origin of its prey and it sees this streamer break free from the bottom and begin to lift and rise right in front of its face, imagine you're the big fish and this is tapping the bottom, and then whoop, this thing swims up in the water column and that marabou's shaking, moving, wiggling. I'm now streamer fishing very delicately in that lower 12 inches of the water column, which is very hard to do with some of the bigger streamers that we'll talk about in the back end of the video. So there's a couple of other ones. I'll just throw them in there. And nobody needs to have all the damn flies I'm showing you today. That's a ridiculous concept for you as do-it-yourself angler, weekend warrior, or whatever your fishing level is. It's ridiculous. Pick out a few that speak to you. Maybe they look like bait fish in your particular region, or you've had success on those colors before. Just get a few, get to know them well, and learn how to fish them. That's by far the most important. But another one I really like is the soccer mom. It's got a squirrel tail on there, and you can see it even just moving in this light breeze. That thing swims. That is a great one to swing and strip when you're working downstream back towards your point of origin, back to the boat, back to the car, whatever you're doing, back to the shop in this instant here. The soccer bomb is a great one to fish on that rising up or that swinging presentation. So jig streamers fished on a monoline, a largely overlooked facet of streamer fishing that's incredibly effective. Another thing to pay attention to, and I'll show you this fly, this pocket dweller one more time, but I'm gonna grip it a little bit differently with my pliers here. These flies are very specifically designed with a very light wire, small hook. And I like that for a bunch of reasons. One, I'm very cognizant of damage to trout. I catch my fair share, maybe more than my fair share. And I really like a streamer with a smaller light wire hook. The other thing is I'm often fishing 5X, you know, anything from 4X to 5X, even 4.5X. There's certain times where my gut tells me that 4X is a little too stiff, and we've been breaking off a few flies or a few fish. When I have light line in a light, ultralight rod, maybe it's one of my long 2 weights or 3 weights, I need to be able to get full hook penetration without a lot of tension. And what I find when I'm streamer fishing on only a semi-tight line, and I still feel that grab. I mean, it's like, it's just meat instantly. But I find that the number of bites to actual hookups and lands is much higher on these very small light wire hooks. I actually find that I land more fish and I hook up, or I have a positive hookup with more fish because that hook penetrates just so easily. It gets right up to the gape, it bites in, there's no barb on it, it's super slick. So I think that's the most overlooked facet of streamer fishing. Next, we're gonna jump into, we'll talk about leeches a little bit. So, all right, let's talk leeches. Leeches exist in all of these different ecosystems. And if you find yourself fishing even a river like this with really soft inside bends or back eddies, for instance, where there's slack water and preferably a softer bottom, you're gonna find leeches. We can screen leeches out of the river every day we want. If we just take a screen down here, get to a slow area, kick some rocks open. Leeches are a very vulnerable food source once they're up in the water column because they're not a flight risk to swim away like a bait fish would be, or a minnow. This is a balanced leech, and this one right here with the red head, and I'll tag most of these flies in the video, but this is tied kind of unique. In fact, I will go ahead and try to put that up to the camera. The line is actually tied to the eyelet, which is up there, and this leech, when you stop stripping it, doesn't take a nosedive like a conventional bugger. So when you stop stripping this leech, it will actually sit and levitate in the water column and just slowly sink vertically. And all of that soft rabbit that's on there will continue to move and undulate much like a natural leech would. So if you're fishing still waters or you're casting and stripping leeches on a slow retrieve, maybe in a lake, maybe on the edge of a back eddy, a balanced leech is a really big advantage in order to do that. Now, naturally, any of the dark streamers that I've showed you in the past will make really good leech patterns as well. Leeches can be anywhere from quite green, actually, quite olive, all the way to nearly jet black, depending on the particular insect and the environment of which they live in. But one leech pattern, or at least it looks like a leech pattern, that has great overlap for just pure streamer fishing, whether you're in a river or in a lake, is one called the hibernator. And I've done some individual videos on the hibernator in the past. And there's just something about the way this guy moves. It's got extremely soft materials. It's got rabbit mixed with a very soft marabou collar on there. And this one just tends to pulsate and move even with the littlest, subtlest tension. So leeches aren't fast swimmers. We generally fish leeches on kind of a strip, pause, maybe 6 to 8 inch strip, pause. And we want that fly to go through a period of undulations and then just levitate for a moment. And the hibernator, it seems, is one fly that will sit there on a very slow retrieve and undulate. And it's almost unweighted. It's just got a tiny, tiny bead on there. So it doesn't take a nosedive and it doesn't fall aggressively in the water column. With leeches, I really like either balanced leeches or very, very lightly weighted leeches so that between strips or when there's a lack of tension, they don't go lifeless and fall to the current like so. But that's the hibernator. And the hibernator, I'll fish this on sink tips as well. I'll fish it on my trout spay rod, but it also makes one heck of a leech pattern, and that's the olive color in the hibernator as well. And I know it looks like just a big ball of fuzz right now, but when that thing lays back and streamlines through the water like that, you see it hanging in the current at your feet, and this is one of those few that just absolutely look alive, and you do a double take looking at your own fly thinking it's a critter swimming around in there. But there are a big variety of different leeches, you know, on our website, but I think it's really important to understand that when you're imitating a leech, you really want to shoot for the kind of that unweighted fly, a very neutral buoyancy, a very neutral density so that it doesn't take a big nosedive. If you're truly imitating leeches, it either has to be undulating in the current with a very slow swimming action, or it's got to be right on the floor of the river. It's not very effective usually to fish on the floor of a lake because there's going to be much more debris and things, but leeches can either be fished right on the bottom or they can be fished mid-column with a sinking line and a lightly weighted or unweighted fly, but very important to know a little bit about leeches. All right, let's talk about the big meat here. Look at that side of beef. That's called the meat sweats. Some of you know what I'm talking about. You eat something, you eat too much meat, you get a little case of the meat sweats. Well, the trout's not gonna get meat sweats. The trout's gonna wind up in your net, hopefully. Let's talk big streamers. And big streamers are gonna typically be fished in a pretty fast moving or a fleeing action from the fish. They're gonna have a lot of moving parts. They could be articulated in the tail. They're gonna have a lot of shag and a lot of movement, just creating that natural movement. And this is like what you would think of as like classic Western streamer fishing, is throwing big bugs. Maybe you're in a drift boat, smashing them against the bank and stripping them back towards the bank, Montana style, if you will. We like to call it Yakima River style, but a lot of people know it as Montana style streamer fishing. We'll just start with the meat sweats. The meat sweats is kind of a unique fly. It imitates a sculpin really well, and you can see for just general scale, it's maybe 3.5, 4 inches long, and it's got a jig head style hook, which is great, and it's got weights on the belly. And I really like the meat sweats when I want to try to fish it slow and low and really get it near the bottom. But there's a line of weights here in this flashy material, so it looks like the white belly of a sculpin, but it actually lays like this when you strip it. And so your hook is ensured to ride up so that when it does impact a rock or a stick or a log, it'll actually swim over it quite effectively, actually. I've really grown to like the meat sweats. It's available in a big variety of different colors, and the longer I fish this fly, the less I've relied on it for like my tight line nymphing. I started out fishing smaller version of the meat sweats like this and sliding it along the rocks with my mono rigs. Still got some line on that one, and that's the little guy. I believe that's the number 8. But the meat sweats has really good action when it's stripped aggressively. And so I like to throw the meat sweats in, give it one little hump mend of neutral slack just to break up the tension. You're line your leader, which gives it just a couple of moments to get down. And I strip the meat sweats pretty aggressively at a pretty much a pop, pop, pop with strategic pauses in and around structure that I might be intercepting on my retrieve. But the sculpin is probably the #1 forage fish in rivers, maybe all across the country. I'm familiar with North America. I haven't fished sculpin in South America, but in Alaska, Russia, I fished lots of sculpin. And sculpin are typically going to be that real olive green color. So as you look into, this is just my everyday streamer box. And again, you don't have to have all this stuff. But as you look in there, you're going to see, green is kind of the dominant color in there. But the meat sweats is an effective fly. It'll swim over structure. If you find yourself snagging bottom a lot, you know, and you're fishing in areas with sticks or other debris that's pretty snaggy, the meat sweats is a really, really good choice for that. Another one that I think everybody has to have, and these are going to be much heavier. I will typically fish my heavy streamers on a floating line most of the time because I may be casting into technical currents and boils and things. And I want to run a long leader. So I personally like at minimum of 7.5 feet to 9 feet a leader on my streamers. I like a long leader because that way I can actually get the streamer to sink better when it's on a floating line. But the next one's going to be a Sculptzilla with that big giant oversized cone head there. And you can see there's red eyes on it, articulated hook in the back, so that hook is actually free to swim and move with the tail. And if that trout decides it's just going to take and cut it in half or only grabs the tail, the hook is in the back end of the tail, so maybe we're more likely to hook the fish. I don't have a strong opinion on whether articulated streamers or straight shank streamers hook more fish. I think it's 6-1, a half dozen the other. But the Sculptzilla is really important to have. It comes in a variety of sizes and colors. It's our #1 selling streamer, no matter where you go. The Sculptzilla is going to be a highly effective pattern. It's a pretty dramatic downsizing to the next size down. In this one, I'll often fish. If I'm using a sink tip, I'm generally going to drop down to the #8. And it's got that little hook in the back end, which I really like, that smaller, slightly smaller, lighter wire hook. I feel like when I get a strike on those lighter wire hooks, I just get instantaneous hook penetration. I've got a positive hookup experience. But the Sculptzilla, I have dead drifted these. I have ran them on tight line rigs. But in order for this fly to really take that natural profile, it really needs to have tension on it. And that can be fished with a stripping presentation. I like to strip my flies with the current if I can. I never want to strip a fly upstream unless it's coming to the end of a swing in like a slow pool or a back eddy. At least rainbow trout don't typically like to chase upstream, and if you do find trout chasing streamers upstream, you're probably going to catch those fish anyways because those are hyper aggressive, very hungry fish, or maybe just aggressive fish, and you're just getting a reactionary strike out of them. The Sculptzilla is one that I've gone away from dead drifting as I've gotten more flies because it has a tendency to curl itself up into a ball and can be easily confused as organic matter or organic debris. So it has a tendency to tumble. The other thing about articulated streamers is this hook will often wind up getting up and around your line and fouling itself. And so if you've gone from some productive fishing with getting a few strikes or a fish and you have a few minutes or an hour or so and you're just like, man, I really felt like that should have been a fish there. These articulated streamers will actually foul themselves and that hook will wind up in the material of the fly, if you can imagine that. And that's one downside of articulated streamers is that hook can get caught in the other material rather than pulling free and having that nice, sleek, streamlined baitfish-like profile. So that's a note about the Sculptzillas. So those are a very, very important streamer to have. Now for my next... All right, so I'm so excited about this fly. And this one kind of falls into the category somewhere between a technical jig streamer that I would fish on one of my long light rods and a big streamer that I could actually cast and strip. Because that bead has got to be solid 4 millimeters. It sinks incredibly fast, very heavy sinking fly, and it's tied with squirrel. So the leather that is in this tail is actually much thinner and doesn't have as much body as rabbit. Rabbit does not sink very fast. It moves like crazy, but squirrel jigs sink way faster than rabbit. So I can take this, and I would usually run a 4X tippet to this one because it's a little bit heavier. Heavier flies allow you to use heavier tippet and still get down, and the tippet can still slice through the water. But I'll run this on my technical rods and I'll slide it downstream at the fish, but I can also take it, I can throw this on my 9-foot 5 weight or my 9-foot 6 weight, fire it up into the bank, into the cut bank, strip it through the rock piles, and actually fish it on a very fast strip. Now, another note, generally speaking here, the heavier the streamer is, the more sensitive they are to proper presentation and maintaining tension between strips. So with these heavy streamers, if I'm on a very straight line, I'm going to strip it very, very quickly. But what I like to do with especially fast sinking flies like this is get a slight downstream belly in my line. the exact belly you're fighting to get rid of when you're dry fly fishing and nymphing. And that way, between strips, my fly stays moving. So my fly will pulse along, and between strips, that current tension or that drag that we're fighting all the time will actually maintain tension, keeping my streamer from doing that ugly nosedive down in the water column, which no bait fish on the planet does that ugly nosedive. So the heavier the fly, the more conscientious you have to maintain some tension between strips in your presentation. So, and I promised myself I wouldn't get too deep into the presentation techniques on streamers here, but streamers, there's some fundamentals of presenting them, and one is, maintaining tension between strips is a really good one. Making sure you're an appropriate distance in the water column. I generally, when I'm fishing on a floating line, as long as I can't see my fly, I'm happy. That's just a general marker. If it's ultra clear water and the fly is very, very deep, try to get it just deep enough to where you can't make out that fly, and the fish tend to feel more comfortable in that range as they're hiding from the osprey and the heron and the angler and everything else. That squirrel jig comes in a variety of colors, and it even comes in straight black, which I'll run as a leech, and I'll fish that through slower areas along the bottom. Leeches belong on the bottom, so that is one circumstance I will fish a very, very heavy leech. I'm gonna speed up a little bit and kind of rumble through the next few. Trout spay. Let's say I'm needing an easy casting, very sleek, only moderately weighted fly that will swing well on a sink tip. That's called the wounded sculpin. Again, tied with squirrel. Very easy casting fly for the total length. The fly doesn't have a very big comb, but the body length is pretty significant on that wounded sculpin, and that one tends to cast really, really well. So if you have trouble casting a trout spay rod, or you have trouble casting larger streamers in general, the wounded sculpin is one that really sails nicely. Castability with streamers is a real issue. Inversely, let's go to this guy, which doesn't cast nearly as well. This is called the seasoned geezer, and I fish this when I'm looking for trophy trout, and I actually fish it for smallmouth really, really a lot. That's a Brammer's pattern from Rio, and it comes in a couple of different colors. And I really like this brush head material for brown trout in low light. I like it for smallmouth. I do catch some very nice rainbows on it, but that seasoned geezer is a pretty significant size fly. It does hold a bit of water in the tail. The head dries out pretty fast, but it's not a particularly fast sinking fly for the size. And so I do really like that when I'm snagging bottom, or I need to be able to throw into the shallow water without risk of snagging. You'll hear me talk about snagging quite a bit. Snagging is like the enemy of the streamer fisherman. If you're snagging bottom a lot, you need to make some adjustments either in fly weight, strategy, sink tip density, or something, but you shouldn't be snagging bottom a whole lot when you're streamer fishing. It should be a pretty fluid operation. Next, this one's brand new. It's still got the price tag on. That's a Dalai Lama, classic, big streamer, lots of action. We used to just call them double bunnies, because you have a light colored bunny material underneath imitating the belly and the darker material up top. I often take and dispose of the Mylar Flash in clear water. I like the Dalai Lama, it's highly effective, but I'm not gonna lie to you, I feel a little bit like I'm fishing a damn Panther Martin when I have this thing on. It's got so much flash. I feel a little bit less like a fly fisherman, a little bit more like a spinner fisherman when I'm throwing that with all the flash on there. So maybe that's part of the reason I like taking the Mylar off of there. But the Dalai Lama is important to have. For trout in the lower 48, I really only fish the smaller size, the Dalai Lama. The bigger one just really has a bigger cone head, so it sinks a little faster. But I find that the smaller size sinks adequately. So I think we're just gonna wrap up. We'll just wrap up the streamer fishing chat. So there's lots of flies here. Again, you don't have to have all these. Focus on getting 4 to 6 patterns that speak to you. You know them well, you know how fast they sink, and get to know how those flies fish, the sink rate they have, and what you need to do to generate strikes on with those individual streamers on your home water.